Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Canaan STL Podcast, brought to you by Canaan Baptist Church, where we exist to connect you to what matters most, to God, to people, and to purpose. Hey, this is Pastor Daniel, and again today, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Martin Winslow. How you doing today, Martin?
What's up, Daniel?
Outstanding. You know, it took me 3 takes just to do that right there. What in the world's going on today?
Yeah, too much coffee or not
Too
enough?
much coffee or not enough? Yeah, probably not enough. Well, hey, today we're continuing talking about the prophecies about the first coming of Jesus. And so last week's podcast, we looked at, the prophecy of the Genesis 3:15, the proto-evangelion, or how you ever say that in the English version, how do you say it in English? Proto-evangelium? How do you pronounce it?
Evangelium, Evangelium.
Evangelion would be the Greek. But anyway, looked at the first gospel, Genesis 3:15, the first prophecy that through the seed of the woman that the Messiah would come. And then we also looked at location of birth last week, how it was prophesied he'd be born in Bethlehem, but he would come out of Egypt, and he'd be called a Nazarene. Well, today we're going to dive right into probably one of the most popular, well-known prophecies about the first coming of Jesus, and that's Isaiah 7:14.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read that real quickly because it's a well-known passage, but just to get it fresh on everyone's mind. So here's what Isaiah 7:14 says. It says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." All right, so there we go. A lot of good stuff in here. So first of all, let's just kind of look at what's the context, Martin? What's the context of Isaiah chapter 7? Who was Isaiah? Who was he prophesying to? When was it? What was going on in the world events, et cetera, to where God sensed the need to unveil this next leg of mystery of who the Messiah would be?
Yeah, Isaiah was prophesying during the 8th century BC.
So that's the 700 BCs. Yep.
700s. In 722 BC, you have Israel that's destroyed by the Assyrians in the north, and then you see a migration south, and they're going to make war against Israel or Jerusalem and Judea.
Yep.
And they even surround the temple at one point, and this is the time that Isaiah is prophesying. He works with King Hezekiah as one of his leaders. Were you going to say something there?
No, I was going to just make sure our listeners understand. So there was a moment in history about 933 BC after the death of King Solomon, which was David's son, where the kingdom of Israel actually split.
Right.
It's a big moment in Old Testament history. And so the northern kingdom kept the name Israel because they were 10 out of the 12 tribes. They were the majority. And then the southern kingdom was known as Judah because it was primarily just the tribe of Judah and the remnants of Benjamin. Right. So that's what happened. So it's the northern kingdom, Israel, made a new capital in Samaria.
Right.
And the southern kingdom maintained the capital in Jerusalem.
Right.
So the northern kingdom then, so fast forward 211 years, 722 BC, the Assyrians destroy the northern kingdom Israel, and there's that migration south, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, and basically, the hand of God was against Israel in the north because even during the time of Jeroboam, when immediately whenever the kingdom divided, he sets up altars to false gods in the south at Bethel and in the north at Dan to keep people from going into Jerusalem because Jerusalem is where the temple is. And so he pulled them together for false worship in the north, and Israel stayed there in that.
They did. In fact, Israel,
idolatry.
From 933 till its destruction 722 never had a godly king.
Exactly.
Not a single one.
They kept worshiping at Dan in the north and Bethel in the south, and they cut themselves off from Jerusalem. So in 722, God brings judgment. The hand of the Assyrians are against them, and they destroy them pretty quickly. And the tribes scatter at that time. Well, then there begins a migration south, and they begin to sack cities around Judea, and they even surround the temple. And during this time, Isaiah cries out to God with the King Hezekiah that God would have mercy on them. And of course, God does. He does a big miracle.
That's right.
Right? And the angel of the Lord comes in and destroys a lot of the Assyrian army.
It's an amazing story, right? Amazing historical account.
Yes, and the Egyptians even have an account of it as well.
Yeah, they do. That's right. And it's even in that time where God makes the sun. Was it stop or does it go backwards right there? with Hezekiah.
You're talking about with Hezekiah.
Yeah, with his prayer.
Yeah. So the shadow moved the opposite direction.
That's right. So the sun moves backwards to answer Hezekiah's prayer. And what's interesting is there's several scientists have noticed that there's a little glitch in their time.
Oh, wow.
History, and it matches exactly the time that the sun moved back with Hezekiah. Really interesting.
Now, I kind of wish he would have died on time because he stays alive 15 more years, and then he has the child Manasseh.
Yeah, Manasseh. But Manasseh ends well. That's actually a great story.
That's true, man. But 55
he starts
years
off
of terror.
horrible. Horrible. Yeah,
he does. So it's a time during Israel when they need a sign, right?
Yeah.
They need signs.
They're surrounded.
Because they're surrounded
by an enemy. Yeah. It seems hopeless. I mean, Assyria, they were Goliath.
Yep.
They were just a monstrosity of an empire, cruel and brutal, and had their treatment of people they captured. And so, I mean, the nation of Judah is they're desperate.
Yeah.
And so, so God gives them hope. And so here we have this prophecy about the hope, the sign that the Lord will give them.
Right.
And it's the virgin will have a son. Right. So interesting. So how does this play out? So the word virgin here, right? There's two meanings for the Hebrew concept for virgin.
Right.
And so what are those two meanings?
Yeah, so there's the Hebrew word alma, and there's another Hebrew word betula. And betula occurs 50 times in the Hebrew Bible, and this term refers exclusively to virgins, okay? But there's also the word alma, and that is what occurs in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. That means marriageable girl, but can also mean virgin as well. And we know that it means virgin here because whenever it picks up in the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, I think it's verse 23, the word Parthenos is used of Mary. So you take that, you couple that with the Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, promise that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. You look at Isaiah chapter 7, you see there's this young woman of marriageable age, which Mary was because she was betrothed to Joseph, even though they had not come together. Yeah. And it all works out perfectly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And what's really fascinating about this prophecy, and it's so intentional that God used the word alma, it can have the dual meaning, because what we see here is this is a great example of a prophecy that has a near fulfillment.
Right.
But then an ultimate fulfillment.
That's right.
So here we are in Isaiah 7. Well, in Isaiah chapter 8, we see the near fulfillment.
That's right.
And so it's the prophetess who has a son, and it's the longest name in the Bible, Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Say that one 3 times fast, right? Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Yeah. And it's really interesting because if you look in Isaiah chapter 8, Maher Shalal Hashbaz is born, and in verse 7, God even refers to him as Emmanuel.
Right.
So he is the near-term fulfillment of that prophecy. But, of course, the ultimate prophecy is going to be the alternate term of virgin, which means a sexual virgin, right?
That's right.
And that's going to be Mary in the New Testament. So really fascinating how this prophecy works here. It's got a near fulfillment in chapter 8 with the birth of Maher Shalal Hashbaz, but then the ultimate, of course, through Jesus Christ. Right. So let's kind of even peel back a little more, though. So here we have the virgin birth prophecy, which is interesting. Even the Muslims' Quran talks about the virgin birth of Jesus and how Mary conceived of the Holy Spirit. So that's interesting how even the false religion of Islam still picks up on that truth. So why does Mary have to be a virgin?
Yeah.
Why is that so theologically necessary?
Yeah. So, we have kids. You've got 7 kids. I've got 5 kids. You and Tara come together. Amy and I come together, and we have children. And those children, as an extension of us, we have human nature as an extension of us. They have human nature as well. Well, what has to happen here, right, in this story, and we'll kind of get to the ins and outs of it, is if that's true, and if God has a son as an extension of him by nature, then he must be divine.
Yes.
The Son.
That's right.
And so because man is sinful, he's born sinful, he's at conception, we are sinful people, right? Yes. We are sinners.
Yeah.
There has to be a way for God to enter into humanity in a way where he can be sinless.
That's right.
And that's where God's Son is a necessity to fix the human problem of sin.
That's right. That's right.
So you still have, a genetic code from Mary, and that probably Jesus carried some of those traits, but he's the perfect son of Adam, right? Because he is God's son.
Yeah.
And so theologically, I think that's why the connection is.
I've got a little bit of a theory, and you can't just pinpoint this in Scripture necessarily, but I think logically, in my mind, it makes sense anyway. So you go to Genesis chapter 1, and you see in verses 26 and 27 where God says, let us make man in our own image, in the likeness of him. So male and female, he makes them in the image of God. Right. And you can unpack, what does that mean? That Adam and Eve were created in the image of God, right? So, of course, that's before the fall. The fall happens, and we know that according to Genesis 2, verse 16 and 17, God had given the law to Adam, says, look, this is all for you. Just don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good, or the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for the day you eat of it, you will surely die. Well, you get to Genesis 3. They eat the forbidden fruit. But they don't immediately die physically. That begins the death process, but they do die spiritually, right? The wages of sin is death. So now, all of a sudden, Adam and Eve are not spiritually alive. They're not in that beautiful, sinless relationship with God. There's now sin. There has to be atonement. All that has to now be dealt with. And then you get to Genesis chapter 5, and it's real interesting. You read here in Genesis 5 where it says, after Adam lived 130 years, he begot a son in back up. Before it says that, it says, when Adam was created, he was created in the image of God. But then it says, after 130 years, Adam begot a son in his own likeness, after his image. And it's almost like Moses there, the author, makes a comparison that, look, when Adam was created, he was created in the image of God. But now Seth is born, and Seth is in the image of Adam. Yeah. Because that's a little different now. It's now a fallen image. And so, things continue. And, that's why Ephesians 2:1, you were dead in your trespasses and sins. We're born physically alive, but spiritually dead. Jesus tells Nicodemus, you must be born again. That which is born of flesh is flesh. That which is born of spirit is spirit. Right. So there's two births. Now, all that's there. And where I'm going with this is, and how does that fallen nature pass from one generation to the other? I would contend it's the seed of the man. Yeah, sure. Right? Sexual activity. Which is why circumcision was the appropriate sign of the old covenant, because it was a symbolic of cleansing the passageway of the sinful seed, if you will. That's what makes Jesus so different, though. Yeah. Jesus was not conceived from Joseph, from a human father that passed that sin nature to him. He was conceived by the Holy Spirit, which passed the divinity. So you had the fullness of God in the fullness of man together. And that, I think that's a great segue into 1 Corinthians 15 that calls Jesus the second Adam. Absolutely. You have the new image of God. Yes, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Makes that even pop more, I think so to speak. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that's why the virgin birth is so important. Yeah. I remember reading, it was a pretty heretical book about 20 years ago. It's by a guy named Rob Bell, so I'm sure you're familiar with. Yeah. He's really gone off the rails. Yep. But in that book, he was just beginning to go off the rails. This was a book called Velvet Elvis. Have you read it? Yeah. And he had a little chapter in there called Springs. And his concept was that our theology shouldn't be so rock solid that if one brick comes out, the whole wall comes down. Instead, it should be like a trampoline with springs, that if one spring busts, you still got other springs, it still moves along fine. And his example that was, he actually posed the question, like, what if it's found out in history that Mary really wasn't a virgin? Yeah. And he kind of argued that point. But biblically, if Mary's not a virgin, this whole thing really forget about it. Thrown off it really is the brick wall. Yep. That's a brick that makes the wall come tumbling down. Yeah. Because that's crucial. Yeah, it's not God's son. He died for his own sins, not ours. That's exactly right. It's exactly right. So this prophecy is huge, and I'm sure the original hearers, how do you think that the original hearers of this prophecies, those who are panicking there in Jerusalem inside the wall when they see this encampment of the Assyrian army, how would they have understood this? Yeah, I think there's probably two ways, especially whenever you take into account the rest of Isaiah's prophecy, right? And you move to Isaiah chapter 9, you've probably got people who are looking for a near fulfillment, right? Because they want it to speak to their lifetime, and that's what you have maybe in Isaiah chapter 8. Hey, this prophetess Isaiah has a son, okay? But you've got to be wondering in the back of your mind, because the scriptures have been handed down to your people, wait, what about this whole virgin birth thing? What about this woman who is going to have a seed? These things that don't make sense, and in the righting of the wrong in the garden, right? Yep. Which makes sense, again, because we talked about this last week, is the fruit going back up on the tree. Yep. How does the woman redeem herself and humanity from the first and original sin? Right. So you probably are going to see some things. And I think this is going to be a problem, right, for the Jewish interpreters as they look back to things like
Genesis 1 you mentioned. Let us make God, or let us make man in our own image. Well, how do you explain that God is one, but he's talking to himself in the plural here? What's going on, right? So there are these things that I think, like Isaiah 7, that would have been unexplainable, that would have been like, Psalm 110, you've got this priest who's also a king. Well, they come from different tribes. These things that are just waiting to be revealed later that they probably just scratch their head.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Awaiting a far fulfillment.
There had to be a lot of that. Like we talked about last week, how can he be from Egypt but also be born in Bethlehem and also be called a Nazarene?
Exactly.
How does all that work?
There's no way you can make that work until it happens.
That's right.
Right?
And that's what Paul talks about, the mystery that's been revealed.
That's it. That's it.
Because there was just so many pieces that didn't seem to fit.
Yeah, right.
And I've often wondered, I know we did this whole thing on eschatology, but how much of that is it going to be at with the second coming too?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, we had great fun talking about the different views with that, but when it's all said and done, we're going, and you're looking back and be like the same way. Like, there's really no way we could have put all that together.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I totally agree.
Not to be a nihilist about it. I mean, I think it's really important to study, but at the same time, we learn from history.
Right.
And it's real fascinating how these prophecies worked in a way that all of them are fulfilled in a very natural, normal, customary sense.
Right.
But yet it seemed like, how does all that work?
Yeah, once it happened, though, it was like a revelation, right?
Yep.
I've heard the Old Testament kind of like explained as like a dimly lit room that you walk into, okay? And you kind of see things, but you're bumping around some.
Yeah.
But when the New Testament comes, it's like the lights just
all the lights come
right?
on. Like,
it was like we were in Fairmont City the other day and we couldn't figure out where the lights were. You remember that in that big building? And you found
where's
them.
this light switch at?
You found the switch, and it's like, oh, everything in the room just kind of came to light. And it's probably like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of that moment, Christmas Vacation with Chevy Chase puts the plugs together and finally his wife figures out the switch and it's hallelujah.
And the music comes on. Yeah.
Oh, that's it. Aha. Yeah. Just gotta watch. I haven't watched that yet this year, so I gotta make sure I do that.
We gotta get out the list, man. Elf is first for us and then Grinch.
Yeah, we already done it. We've done Elf, we've done the Grinch.
You did the Grinch already. Okay.
Yep. So gotta do White Christmas, Wonderful Life.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. We digress. But so fascinating prophecy here with the dual fulfillment. And that really takes us right into Isaiah chapter 9, which we're kind of talking about on Sundays, but very similar type prophecy, similar context. But here we go with the child again. A child will be born, a son will be given to us. List his name, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, and tie that to Emmanuel. So it's really interesting, the Trinity type concepts that's abound into this concept, how the Son will be given, but then this Son is described like he's God.
Yeah, that's right.
He's the Prince of Peace.
Yep.
He is he is mighty God.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
it makes you wonder why that one's really clear.
Yeah.
In my estimation, that is one of the prophecies that is very clear that the Messiah is not going to be just a man. He's going to be mighty God. He's going to be, everlasting Father, right? And we're actually unpacking that this Sunday. So it's just really fascinating how it seems so many of the Jewish rabbis just missed that or explained that away or ignored that,
Well, and if you see, you see that and you've got to imagine Jesus is unpacking these things for the disciples whenever they're walking between villages, they're going through the 10 cities of the Decapolis, wherever, and he's explaining all these things to them, but then he ends up on a cross.
That's a head scratcher.
Yeah. So and that's why I think even some of the people are like, hey, he healed others. He helped others. Let him help himself down. Come on down, right? And
you got to say, I know some of those were mocking, but you got to know some of them might have been serious too.
Some of them may have been serious. Yeah. That's right, because they're like, well, we did see things that we could never explain that he did.
And just a little over a week before that, Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead.
That's right.
And that was really close by. Right. So there was a buzz about that.
So you can kind of see like this mysterious, until you get to the other side of Easter, this mysterious kind of thing going on where people are just really trying to figure it all out.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because the disciples, I mean, he says in John chapter 8, verse 58, he says, before Abraham was, I am. They pick up stones to kill. They know he's quoting Exodus 3.
Yep.
They know that he's claiming to be God, but all of a sudden he's on a cross and he's dying. And, it's just, it's crazy stuff.
Yeah.
It's crazy
Yeah,
stuff.
and in the Gospel of John, Jesus even says, if you've known me, you've known the Father, for I and the Father are one.
Yeah, right.
There's that kind of language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So, yeah, it's a curveball.
But isn't it interesting, too, within the book of Isaiah, you've got Isaiah 9, okay, all this stuff. He's going to be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. Mm-hmm. And let's say you grab onto that and you say, yes, okay, I'm going to believe this. This is what the Messiah is going to be. But then you get to chapter 53.
Suffering servant.
And you see all this suffering stuff, and you're just like, you're puzzled.
Yeah.
How can these things go together? It's kind of like what you said about he'll be called the Nazarene. He's going to go to Egypt, and he's going to be born in Bethlehem. Like those things just don't make sense until you get to the other side of it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. But you see why the odds are so high. That MIT professor that figured out the odds. It's just, it's impossible for anyone to do all this and for it just to be coincidence.
Right.
So what's the most probable explanation?
Yeah.
He really is who he is. He's the Son of God.
That's right.
He's God incarnate.
Yeah, and you think that makes those prophecies even more impossible. You've got prophecies that say God in human form is going to show up, right? We believe that, but now we have prophecies that say God in human form is going to be destroyed and killed on a cross. And you're like, well, wait a minute, God can't be killed, right?
That's right.
And everything makes sense only after the incarnation.
Yep.
So that makes it even more like impossible, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So
interesting stuff.
Awesome stuff, yeah.
I think next week we may tackle some of the Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
That's a really good prophecy. Yeah, that's good. All right, well, if you have any questions or comments, just shoot them our way at info@canaanstl.org. Glad you're joining in as we are celebrating Advent, just preparing for the coming of Jesus and worship. And so love to see you here on Sundays. But until then, we'll talk to you next time on Canaan STL Podcast.